The revolver felt heavier than usual against Fiona Garrett's hip as she rode into Skidoo, California on a dusty afternoon in August 1882. Her heart shattered into so many pieces she wondered if anything could ever make her whole again. The mining town sprawled across the desert landscape like a collection of broken promises. Wooden buildings bleached by the relentless sun and dreams that had long since turned to dust. She had traveled 300 miles from Sacramento with nothing but the clothes on her back, a loaded Colt revolver, and memories that cut deeper than any blade ever could. The horse beneath her, a spotted mare named Delilah, picked her way carefully through the main street as curious eyes tracked their progress. Fiona kept her gaze forward, her jaw set in a hard line that had become permanent over the past 6 months. She had learned not to meet anyone's eyes directly, not to invite conversation or kindness, because both felt like salt in wounds that refused to heal. Her dark hair hung in a braid down her back, streaked with dust from the journey, and her simple riding dress had seen better days. But none of that mattered anymore. Nothing had mattered since the day she found Thomas bleeding out in their cabin, victim of a robbery gone wrong, his last breath a whisper of her name. Skidoo was smaller than she had expected. Maybe 24 buildings clustered around the main street, with mining operations visible in the hills beyond. The town had sprung up around gold discoveries just a few years prior, and it still had that raw, unfinished quality of a place that might disappear as quickly as it had appeared. A saloon stood on one corner, its painted sign proclaiming it the Desert Rose, while across the street a general store looked surprisingly well stocked for such a remote location. A livery stable, a blacksmith, a boarding house, and what appeared to be a small church completed the main establishments. It was exactly the kind of place where a woman could disappear, could start over, could maybe outrun the ghosts that followed her. Fiona guided Delilah toward the livery stable, her body moving automatically through the familiar motions of travel, even as her mind remained locked in the past. The stable hand who emerged was a weathered man in his 60s, his face carved by years of desert sun and hard living. He nodded respectfully as she dismounted, and she appreciated that he did not stare or ask questions. "Need her tended for the night or longer?" he asked, his voice rough as gravel. "Longer," Fiona replied, her own voice hoarse from days of minimal conversation. "I am looking for work." "Is there a boarding house that takes women?" Mrs. Chen runs a respectable place at the end of the street. Clean rooms, fair prices. As for work, you might try the general store or the restaurant behind the saloon. They are always needing help. He paused, then added more gently, "Not many single women come through Skidoo. You will stand out some." Fiona nodded her understanding and paid him for a week's care of Delilah. She retrieved her saddlebags, which contained the sum total of her worldly possessions, and made her way down the street. The afternoon heat pressed down like a physical weight, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath her dusty clothes. A few men passed her on the wooden sidewalk, tipping their hats politely, their eyes lingering with curiosity but not hostility. She supposed that was something. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a 2-story structure painted a faded yellow, with a small garden out front that showed signs of careful tending despite the harsh climate. Fiona knocked on the door and waited, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. When the door opened, a petite Chinese woman in her 40s stood before her, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "You need room?" Mrs. Chen asked without preamble. "Yes, madam. I can pay for a month in advance." Fiona fumbled in her saddlebag for the leather pouch that held her remaining money. It was not much, but she had been careful on the journey, Mrs. Chen quoted a price that seemed fair and stepped aside to let Fiona enter. The interior was surprisingly cool and meticulously clean, with simple furnishings and vases of dried flowers that added unexpected touches of beauty. Mrs. Chen led her up a narrow staircase to a small room at the back of the second floor. It contained a bed, a washstand, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the desert hills. "Meals in the dining room morning and evening if you want," Mrs. Chen said. "No men in rooms. No trouble. You look like you need rest." Fiona felt an unexpected lump form in her throat at the simple kindness in those last words. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and Mrs. Chen left her alone. Fiona set down her saddlebags and sank onto the bed, suddenly trembling. She had made it. She was far from Sacramento, far from the cabin where Thomas had died in her arms, far from the pitying looks and whispered conversations. Here, no one knew her story. Here she could be anyone. But as she lay back on the simple bed and closed her eyes, the memories rushed back as they always did. Thomas's laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the plans they had made for their future together. They had been married only 8 months when 3 men broke into their cabin looking for money they did not have. Thomas had fought them, and one had pulled a knife. By the time Fiona grabbed the rifle from above the mantel and fired, sending the intruders fleeing, it was already too late. She had held Thomas as his life bled away, helpless and screaming, until neighbors heard and came running. The sheriff had caught 2 of the 3 men. They had been tried and hanged. But it did not bring Thomas back. Nothing would bring him back. Fiona pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She could not break down now, not when she had come so far. She needed to be strong to survive, to figure out how to keep living in a world that no longer made sense. The revolver at her hip was a constant reminder that she had failed to protect the man she loved. She wore it now like a penance, like a promise that she would never again be helpless. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her and she slept, a fitful rest plagued by familiar nightmares. When she woke, the room was filled with the golden light of late afternoon. Her mouth felt like cotton and her body ached from days in the saddle, but she forced herself up and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. She washed her face and hands, changed into her only other dress, one slightly less dusty than what she had been wearing, and braided her hair again. In the small mirror above the washstand, she looked like a stranger. Her face had lost its softness over the past months, her cheekbones more prominent, her eyes harder. She was 23 years old and felt ancient. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Chen in the dining room setting the table for supper. The older woman glanced up and nodded approvingly at Fiona's appearance. "You look better. Sit, eat soon. There are 4 others boarding here, all men, but they are respectful." Fiona hesitated. "I was told there might be work at the general store or the restaurant. Do you know if they are hiring?" Mrs. Chen paused in her work. "Martin at the store, he is getting old. Could use help with inventory and customers. Restaurant always needs someone, but there is also the schoolhouse. Teacher left last month. You have education." Fiona had not considered teaching. She had gone through 8th grade, which was more than many, and Thomas had been teaching her more advanced reading and mathematics before he died. He had been educated back east, had dreams of becoming a lawyer before the lure of California gold had drawn him west. "Some," she admitted. "Not much formal training, but I can read and write and do figures. Town council is desperate. School closed because no teacher. Parents are angry. You should talk to Mayor Hendricks. His office is in the general store." The idea of teaching appealed to Fiona in a way she had not expected. It would give her purpose, keep her busy, and children were innocent in a way that might be healing. Or at least they would not ask painful questions about her past. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will speak with him tomorrow." That evening, Fiona met her fellow boarders. There was old Charlie, a prospector who had been in Skidoo since its founding and seemed to know everyone. There was Marcus, a quiet carpenter from Missouri. There was young Jimmy, barely 18 and working as a clerk in the assay office, still raw with homesickness for his family back in Texas. And there was a man in his late 20s who arrived just as they were sitting down to eat, his clothes dusty from the trail and an easy smile on his face. "Sorry I am late, Mrs. Chen," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Got held up mending fence at the Miller place." "Always working, Zachary," Mrs. Chen said with what might have been approval. "We have new boarder. Miss Garrett, this is Zachary Holbrook. He does ranch work for several spreads around here." Zachary Holbrook turned his attention to Fiona, and she found herself meeting eyes the color of summer sky, set in a face that was weathered but kind, framed by sandy brown hair that needed a trim. He was tall, rangy in the way of men who spent their lives doing hard physical labor, and when he smiled at her, it reached all the way to those blue eyes. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Garrett," he said, his voice carrying a warm Texas drawl. "Welcome to Skidoo. I hope you will find it to your liking." "Thank you," Fiona managed, something about his genuine warmth catching her off guard. She was not ready for warmth, not ready for kindness that felt real rather than perfunctory. They sat down to dinner, and Mrs. Chen served a surprisingly good meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables that must have cost a fortune in this desert town. The conversation flowed around Fiona as the men discussed local news and concerns. A mountain lion had been spotted near one of the outlying ranches. The mine yields were down this month. Someone's well had gone dry and they were digging deeper. Fiona ate quietly, content to listen, but she was aware of Zachary Holbrook sitting across from her. He did not stare, but a few times she caught him glancing her way with an expression of gentle curiosity. When their eyes met, he did not look away ashamed like many men would. Instead, he offered that same kind smile. "Where are you from, Miss Garrett?" Old Charlie asked around a mouthful of potatoes, "If you do not mind my asking." "Sacramento," Fiona said quietly. "I needed a change of scenery." Something in her tone must have warned them off further questions, because the conversation moved on to other topics. But she noticed Zachary watching her with an expression that suggested he heard what she had not said. It made her uncomfortable, that perception, and she found herself avoiding his gaze for the rest of the meal. After dinner, Fiona excused herself and went back to her room. She could hear the sounds of the town settling in for the evening, the distant noise from the saloon, someone playing a harmonica somewhere, the occasional bark of a dog. She sat by her window and watched the sun set over the desert hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that were almost painfully beautiful. She thought about Thomas, as she did every evening. Wondered what he would think of this place, of her choice to run so far from everything they had known together. Would he be disappointed that she had not stayed and faced down her grief in familiar surroundings? Or would he understand that she could not breathe there anymore, that every corner of Sacramento held memories that were suffocating her? Her hand drifted to the revolver at her hip, a habit she had developed. The weight of it was both a comfort and a curse. She should probably take it off, hang it on the bedpost, or put it in a drawer. But she could not seem to let it go. It was proof that she was no longer helpless, even if it was proof that came too late. A knock at her door startled her. When she opened it, Mrs. Chen stood there with a cup of tea. "You need this," the older woman said firmly, pressing it into Fiona's hands. "Help you sleep better." "Thank you," Fiona whispered, touched by the gesture. Mrs. Chen studied her for a moment, her dark eyes seeing too much. "Whatever brought you here, you are safe now. Skidoo is good town, good people. You give it chance, maybe it gives you chance too." Before Fiona could respond, Mrs. Chen turned and headed back downstairs. Fiona closed the door and sipped the tea, finding it fragrant with herbs she did not recognize. She finished it slowly, then prepared for bed. That night, perhaps because of the tea or perhaps because of simple exhaustion, she slept more deeply than she had in weeks. The next morning, Fiona woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. She dressed carefully in her better dress, pinned her hair up in a neat style, and made sure her appearance was as respectable as possible. If she was going to ask about the teaching position, she needed to look the part. Breakfast was a quieter affair than dinner had been. Jimmy had already left for the assay office, and old Charlie was heading out to his claim. Marcus ate quickly and disappeared to whatever carpentry job awaited him. That left Zachary, who was working his way through a substantial plate of eggs and bacon. "Morning, Miss Garrett," he said cheerfully. "You settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you," Fiona replied, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Chen. "I heard you asking about work yesterday," Zachary continued. "If you are interested in the teaching job, I would be happy to introduce you to Mayor Hendricks. He is a good man, fair-minded." Fiona hesitated, not sure she wanted company on this errand, but it seemed churlish to refuse such a genuine offer. "That would be kind of you." They finished breakfast and walked together down the main street. The morning air was already warm, promising another scorching day, but there was something clean about it, a clarity that Fiona had not experienced in the city. Zachary walked with an easy, loose-limbed stride, occasionally tipping his hat to people they passed. He seemed to know everyone, and everyone seemed to like him. "You do ranch work?" Fiona asked, more to fill the silence than because she was genuinely curious. "Among other things," Zachary replied. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas, came out to California about 5 years ago looking for adventure. Found out I was better suited to honest work than prospecting, so I hire out to the ranches around here. Mending fences, breaking horses, moving cattle, whatever needs doing. Keeps me busy and I like being outside." There was something peaceful about his manner, Fiona thought. He did not seem like a man with demons chasing him, though she supposed everyone had their secrets. They reached the general store, and Zachary held the door open for her. Inside, it was dim and cooler, shelves stacked with everything from canned goods to mining equipment. An older man with wire-rimmed spectacles stood behind the counter, and his face lit up when he saw Zachary. "Morning, Zach." "What can I do for you?" "Morning, Martin. I have brought someone to meet Mayor Hendricks. This is Miss Fiona Garrett, just arrived in town. She is interested in the teaching position." Martin's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, the mayor is in the back office. Let me get him." He disappeared through a doorway behind the counter and returned a moment later with a man in his 50s, solidly built with graying hair, and a serious expression that softened when he saw potential salvation for the town's education problem. "Miss Garrett, I am Hugh Hendricks. Martin tells me you are interested in teaching." "I am," Fiona said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "I understand your previous teacher left and the school is closed." "That is correct. Miss Wilson decided desert life was not to her liking and returned to San Francisco. We have about 15 children of school age and their parents are growing increasingly concerned." "Do you have teaching experience?" "No formal experience," Fiona admitted. "But I have completed 8th grade and have done additional study beyond that. I can teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and some science." Mayor Hendricks studied her carefully. "May I ask why you came to Skidoo, Miss Garrett? We are rather remote." Fiona had prepared for this question. I am widowed recently. I needed to make a fresh start somewhere new. I am looking for honest work and a place to belong. Her directness seemed to impress him. I am sorry for your loss. We are a small community here, but we look after our own. The teaching position includes a small salary, paid quarterly by the town council, plus use of the rooms above the schoolhouse if you wish. The previous teacher found them adequate. The idea of her own space, away from the boarding house where curious eyes might watch, appealed to Fiona. I would like to see the schoolhouse if possible. Of course. Zach, would you mind taking Miss Garrett over? I need to open the store, but if she is interested, have her come back and we will discuss details. Zachary agreed readily, and soon they were walking down a side street toward a small white building with a bell tower. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, with a view of the desert stretching endlessly beyond. It was a simple structure, one room for classes with a small apartment accessible by an exterior staircase at the back. Zachary unlocked the door with a key Mayor Hendricks had provided and stepped aside to let Fiona enter first. The classroom was sparse but functional, with benches and desks for the students, a larger desk for the teacher, a blackboard on one wall, and shelves that held a modest collection of books and supplies. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows, and the air smelled of chalk and old wood. It is not much, Zachary said, but the town takes education seriously. They built this just 2 years ago. Fiona walked slowly around the room, imagining it filled with children, imagining herself standing at the front teaching them to read and cipher. It felt right in a way she had not expected. Here, she could make a difference. Here, she could pour her energy into something constructive instead of letting grief consume her. "Can I see the apartment?" she asked. They went back outside and climbed the exterior stairs to a door that opened into 2 small rooms. The first was a combination sitting room and kitchen area with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair by the window. The second was a bedroom with a simple bed, dresser, and washstand. It was modest, but it was private and it was hers if she wanted it. "It is perfect," Fiona said quietly. Zachary smiled. "I think the mayor will be pleased to hear it. The parents have been getting restless about the school being closed." They returned to the general store, and Fiona told Mayor Hendricks she would accept the position. He seemed genuinely relieved, and explained that she would be expected to teach Monday through Friday, from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, with lessons appropriate to the varying ages and skill levels of her students. He would arrange for her to move into the apartment above the school and would introduce her to some of the families that evening. As Fiona and Zachary walked back to the boarding house so she could collect her things, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it as hope, small and fragile but undeniably present. "Thank you for your help," she said to Zachary. "You did not have to spend your morning on my behalf." "I was happy to," he replied. "Besides, I was supposed to help with fence repairs at the Wilson Ranch, but they sent word yesterday it could wait, so I had time." He paused, then added more seriously, "I know you have been through something difficult, Miss Garrett. I will not pry. But if you ever need help with anything, fixing things at the schoolhouse or whatever, you can count on me." Fiona looked at him, at the genuine kindness in his blue eyes, and felt something crack open inside her. She was not ready for it, not ready for someone to be kind without expecting anything in return. Her grief was still too raw, her heart too broken. "I appreciate that," she managed, her voice tight. If Zachary noticed her discomfort, he did not show it. He simply tipped his hat and headed off toward the livery stable, leaving Fiona standing in the street watching him go. Over the next several days, Fiona settled into her new life in Skidoo. She moved into the apartment above the schoolhouse and spent time preparing the classroom for her students. Mayor Hendricks introduced her to various families, and she met the children who would be in her care. They ranged from 6-year-old Emma, who could barely write her name, to 14-year-old Robert, who was already helping his father in the mine but whose mother insisted he continue his education. The parents were welcoming if somewhat curious about the young widow who had appeared in their town. Fiona kept her answers brief and turned conversations back to their children's education. She developed lesson plans, organized the limited supplies, and tried to create an environment that would be welcoming and conducive to learning. School began on a Monday morning in early September. Fiona stood at the front of the classroom as 15 children filed in, their faces ranging from eager to suspicious. She took a deep breath and introduced herself, then began the process of assessing where each student was academically. It was challenging and exhausting, but by the end of that first day, she felt more alive than she had in months. Teaching gave her purpose. The children needed her, depended on her, and that need pulled her outside of her own grief. She could not wallow when Emma was struggling with her letters, or when Robert needed help with advanced mathematics. She had to be present, had to be focused, and that forced presence began to chip away at the numbness that had encased her since Thomas's death. Zachary stopped by the schoolhouse one afternoon after classes had let out. Fiona was cleaning the blackboard when she heard his knock at the door. "Miss Garrett, hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all," Fiona said, setting down her cloth. "What can I do for you?" "I noticed one of the windows has a cracked pane," Zachary said, "and the step on your stairs is coming loose. Thought I would fix them if you would like." Fiona had noticed both issues but had not gotten around to addressing them. "That would be very helpful, thank you." Zachary had brought his tools and materials, and Fiona watched as he efficiently replaced the cracked glass and secured the loose step. He worked with the easy competence of someone who had done such tasks 1,000 times, and she found herself oddly comforted by his presence. "You seem to be settling in well," Zachary said as he hammered the final nail into place. "Heard from several parents that their children are happy with the new teacher." "They are good children," Fiona replied, "eager to learn, most of them." "That is high praise coming from you," Zachary said with a smile. "You do not strike me as someone who gives compliments easily." Fiona felt her defenses rise. "You do not know me well enough to know what I am like." Zachary paused in his work and looked at her directly. "You are right, I do not. But I would like to, if you would allow it." The directness of his statement caught Fiona off guard. She opened her mouth to offer some polite deflection, but what came out instead was raw honesty. "I am not ready for friendship. I am barely ready to be alive." Instead of being offended, Zachary simply nodded. "That is fair. But maybe someday you will be ready, and when that day comes, I will still be here." He finished his repairs, gathered his tools, and left without pressing her further. Fiona stood in the empty classroom, her heart pounding, feeling simultaneously relieved and disappointed by his easy acceptance of her boundaries. As weeks passed, Fiona fell into a routine. She taught during the day, prepared lessons in the evening, and on Sundays she would take long walks out into the desert, needing the solitude and the endless sky. She spoke to Thomas on those walks, telling him about her days, about the children she taught, about the strange little town she now called home. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she just sat on a rock and stared at the horizon until the sun began to set. Zachary had a habit of appearing when he was needed. A shutter came loose in a windstorm, and he was there to fix it. The stove in her apartment began smoking badly, and he cleaned the flue. When she struggled to move a heavy box of new textbooks that Mayor Hendricks had ordered, Zachary happened by and carried it up the stairs for her. "You have some sort of sense that tells you when things need fixing?" Fiona asked one day, exasperated by his perfect timing. Zachary laughed. "Not exactly. I just pay attention, and I make it my business to check on people who might need help." "I do not need you to take care of me," Fiona said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "I know you do not," Zachary replied easily. "You are one of the most capable women I have ever met, but there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely offered." Fiona wanted to argue, but she could not find the words. She had been taking care of herself for months, had convinced herself that she did not need anyone. But the truth was that Zachary's help made her life easier, and his presence, while unsettling, was not unwelcome. "I am sorry," she said finally. "That was rude of me." "You are grieving," Zachary said simply. "You get to be rude sometimes." The understanding in his voice made her throat tight. "How do you know about that?" "Mrs. Chen mentioned you are widowed. I did not need details to see you are hurting. It is in everything you do, the way you hold yourself so careful, like you might break if you relax even a little." Fiona felt exposed, seen in a way she had been trying to avoid. "I do not want to talk about it." "Then we will not," Zachary said. "But if you ever do want to talk, I am a good listener." He left then, and Fiona found herself staring after him, emotions churning in her chest. She did not want to feel anything for anyone. Her heart was broken, smashed beyond repair, and she had no room for anyone new. But Zachary was making it difficult to maintain her walls. October brought cooler temperatures and an incident that changed everything. Fiona was walking back from the general store one late afternoon, her arms full of supplies for the classroom, when two men stumbled out of the saloon arguing loudly. One of them, clearly drunk, shoved the other, who fell into the street directly in Fiona's path. She stepped back quickly, but not quickly enough. The drunk man's wild swing caught her shoulder and sent her sprawling, her packages flying everywhere. Before she could react, the man was looming over her, his breath reeking of whiskey, his eyes unfocused. "Watch where you are going," he slurred. Fiona's hand went instinctively to the revolver at her hip, the one she still wore every day despite the schoolchildren's curious questions. Her fingers closed around the grip, and she was pulling it free when a familiar voice cut through her panic. "Step away from her. Now." Zachary appeared as if from nowhere, his usual easy manner replaced by something hard and dangerous. The drunk man turned to argue but seemed to reconsider when he saw Zachary's expression. With a muttered curse, he staggered off down the street. His companion, more sober, offered an embarrassed apology before following. Zachary knelt beside Fiona, his hands gentle as he helped her sit up. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine," Fiona said automatically, even as she realized she was shaking. Her hand was still gripping the revolver, her knuckles white. "Hey," Zachary said softly. "You are safe. He is gone. You are safe." Slowly, Fiona released the gun and let Zachary help her to her feet. He gathered her scattered supplies while she stood there trembling, hating herself for the reaction, hating that she could not control it. When he had collected everything, he gently took her arm and guided her toward the schoolhouse. "Come on, let's get you home." Fiona let him lead her, too shaken to protest. In her apartment, Zachary set down the supplies and fetched her a glass of water. She sank into the rocking chair and took it with shaking hands. "That was not about a drunk man bumping into you," Zachary said quietly. "Was it?" Fiona stared at the water in her glass. "No. Do you want to tell me?" And suddenly she did. The words came pouring out, months of pent-up grief and rage and helplessness. She told him about Thomas, about the men who broke into their cabin, about holding her husband as he died, about the rifle she had grabbed too late to save him. She told him about the nightmares, the guilt, the way she wore the revolver now like some kind of talisman against ever being helpless again. Zachary listened without interrupting, his blue eyes full of compassion but not pity. When she finally ran out of words, her face wet with tears she had not realized she was crying, he handed her his handkerchief. "I am so sorry that happened to you," he said simply. "No one should have to go through that." "I should have been faster," Fiona whispered. "If I had just grabbed the gun sooner." "Fiona," Zachary said, using her first name for the first time, "it was not your fault. You know that, right? What happened to Thomas was not your fault." "I feel like it was. Feelings are not always truth." Zachary pulled a chair over and sat down so they were at eye level. "You were a victim too. Those men chose to break in, chose violence. That is on them, not you." "Then why do I feel so guilty?" "Because you loved him. Because survivor's guilt is real. Because grief is messy and complicated, and there is no right way to feel." Zachary paused. "But carrying a gun you are prepared to use at any moment, wearing it like armor, holding yourself so tight you can barely breathe, that is not healing, Fiona. That is just surviving." His words hit her like a physical blow because they were true. She had been surviving, not living, just making it through each day without actually feeling anything except when the nightmares came. "I do not know how to be any other way now," she admitted. "Maybe you let someone help you figure it out," Zachary suggested gently. "Maybe you do not have to do this alone." Fiona looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that terrified and comforted her in equal measure. He cared about her. This man who barely knew her, who had no reason to involve himself in her broken life, genuinely cared. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because from the first moment I saw you at Mrs. Chen's table, I saw someone who was hurting but refusing to break, someone strong and stubborn and brave, and I thought, there is a woman worth knowing, worth helping if she will let me." "I am not brave," Fiona said. "I ran away from everything familiar." "Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do," Zachary countered. "You came to a strange town, started over completely, took on the responsibility of teaching children. That took courage." Fiona felt something shift inside her, some small crack in the armor she had built around her heart. She was not ready to let it fall completely, but maybe she could lower it just a little. Maybe she could accept that this man was offering genuine friendship with no ulterior motive beyond simply wanting to help. "Will you stay for a while?" she asked quietly. "I do not want to be alone right now." "Of course," Zachary said. They talked for hours that evening about everything and nothing. Zachary told her about growing up in Texas, about his family who still ran a ranch there, about his decision to come to California and see more of the world. He had been engaged once, he admitted, but she had chosen someone else, and while it had hurt at the time, he had come to see it as for the best. "I think we wanted different things," he said. "She wanted security and a settled life. I was too restless back then, too eager to roam. Maybe I still am a bit. But you have been in Skidoo for how long? 3 years now. I guess it grows on you." When Zachary finally left, it was late and Fiona was exhausted but felt lighter than she had in months. She had shared her burden with someone, and he had not run away or told her to simply get over it. He had listened and understood and offered support without judgment. That night, she took off the revolver before bed for the first time since arriving in Skidoo. She set it on the dresser, within reach but not on her person, and discovered she could sleep anyway. Over the following weeks, Zachary became a regular fixture in Fiona's life. He would stop by the schoolhouse after classes to walk her home, or they would have dinner together at the boarding house. Or on Sundays, he would join her on her walks into the desert. They talked about everything: books they had read, places they wanted to see, memories of their pasts, dreams for their futures. Fiona found herself laughing again, something she had not done since Thomas died. Zachary had a dry wit and a gift for storytelling, and he could find humor in everyday situations without being mean-spirited. He treated her with respect and kindness, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, content to simply be her friend. But Fiona was beginning to realize that her feelings were evolving into something beyond friendship. She noticed things: the way her heart beat faster when she saw him approaching, the way she looked for excuses to spend time with him, the way she caught herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day. It terrified her. She felt like she was betraying Thomas by having feelings for someone else. One Sunday in late November, they had walked farther out into the desert than usual and were sitting on a flat rock watching the sun begin its descent. Fiona had been quiet for most of the walk, wrestling with her conflicting emotions. "You have been somewhere else today," Zachary observed. "Want to talk about it?" "I feel guilty," Fiona blurted out. "About being happy sometimes, about enjoying your company, about having feelings I have no business having." Zachary turned to look at her, his expression serious. Feelings for who? Fiona could not make herself say the words, so she just looked at him, hoping he would understand. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like hope. "Fiona, are you saying—" "I do not want to feel this way," she interrupted. "I love Thomas. I still love him. How can I have feelings for someone else when he has been gone less than a year?" "Because you are alive," Zachary said gently. "Because grief and love can coexist. Because having feelings for someone new does not erase what you had with Thomas. It feels like betrayal. Would Thomas want you to be alone and miserable for the rest of your life?" Fiona thought about her late husband, about his generous heart and his belief in seizing happiness where you could find it. "No," she admitted. "He would want me to be happy." "Then maybe you could try letting yourself be happy," Zachary suggested. "Not forgetting him, not replacing him, just allowing yourself to feel something good again." "I am scared," Fiona whispered. "Of what?" "Of caring about someone and losing them again. Of opening my heart and having it shattered. I do not think I could survive that twice." Zachary took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "I cannot promise I will never leave or that nothing bad will ever happen. Life does not come with guarantees. But I can promise that I care about you deeply, Fiona Garrett, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy for as long as you will let me." Fiona looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch spread through her. Slowly, tentatively, she interlaced her fingers with his. "I care about you too," she said quietly, "more than I thought I could ever care about anyone again." "That is enough," Zachary said. "We do not have to rush anything. We can take this as slow as you need." They sat there as the sun set, holding hands and watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and red. Fiona felt something unfold in her chest, something that might have been the very beginning of healing. December brought colder weather and preparations for Christmas. The schoolchildren were excited about the upcoming holiday, and Fiona organized a Christmas program where they would perform songs and recitations for their families. It kept her busy and distracted from the fact that this would be her first Christmas without Thomas. Zachary sensed her melancholy as the holiday approached and made it his mission to create new, happy memories. He took her to cut a small pine tree for her apartment, helped her string popcorn garlands, and even convinced her to attend the town's Christmas social at the church. The social was a simple affair, with music provided by a fiddle player and guitarist, food brought by various families, and children running around excitedly. Fiona wore her best dress and stood near the wall feeling awkward until Zachary appeared at her side and offered his hand. "Dance with me." "I am not much of a dancer," Fiona protested. "Neither am I, but no one here will judge. Come on." He pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor and swept her into a simple waltz. Fiona stumbled at first, but Zachary was patient, guiding her through the steps until she relaxed enough to enjoy it. Dancing with him felt different than dancing with Thomas had. Where Thomas had been earnest and slightly clumsy, Zachary was confident and smooth. It was not better or worse, just different, and Fiona found she could accept that. They danced several times that evening, and Fiona found herself genuinely enjoying the party. Neighbors were friendly, the food was good, and the sense of community was warm and welcoming. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt like she might actually belong somewhere again. On Christmas Day, Fiona attended church services in the morning, then had dinner with Mrs. Chen and the other boarders. Zachary gave her a beautifully bound book of poetry, which made her eyes sting with tears because it was so thoughtful. She gave him a new pair of work gloves she had carefully sewn from leather, which he proclaimed the finest gloves he had ever owned. That evening, Zachary walked her back to the schoolhouse, and they stood at the bottom of her stairs looking at each other in the fading light. "Thank you," Fiona said, "for making today bearable, for making this whole season bearable." "You do not have to thank me," Zachary replied. "I just want you to be happy." Fiona took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I am happy. When I am with you, I am happy. And that scares me, but it also feels right." Zachary smiled, that warm smile that reached his eyes. "Fiona, I need to tell you something. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the day we met. And I know you might not be ready to hear that, but I needed to say it." Fiona felt her heart stutter in her chest. Part of her wanted to panic, to retreat, to protect herself. But a larger part recognized the truth in his words and in her own heart. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "We will figure it out together," Zachary promised. Then, very slowly, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and nothing like the desperate passion she had shared with Thomas. It was its own thing, special and new, and when they pulled apart, Fiona was smiling through tears. "I did not think I could feel this way again," she said. "I am glad you can," Zachary replied, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. They said goodnight, and Fiona climbed the stairs to her apartment feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. She was in love again. It did not erase her love for Thomas, or diminish the grief she still carried, but it existed alongside those feelings, proof that her heart was bigger than she had imagined. The new year of 1883 brought changes. Zachary began talking about his future, about his desire to have his own ranch someday rather than working for others. He had been saving money for years and thought he might have enough to purchase land and start small. "There is a property for sale about 10 miles from here," he told Fiona one evening in January. "Nothing fancy, just a small ranch house and enough grazing land for a decent herd. I have been thinking about making an offer." "That sounds wonderful," Fiona said, meaning it. "You would be good at running your own place. Would you come see it with me?" Zachary asked. "I value your opinion." They rode out the following Sunday on horses borrowed from the livery. The property was modest but beautiful in its own way, nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. The house needed work, but it was structurally sound, and the land itself was good. As they explored, Fiona could picture Zachary here, could see the potential. But more than that, she found herself imagining a future here with him. It was a startling realization, how easily he had become part of her dreams. "What do you think?" Zachary asked as they stood on the porch of the house. "I think you should buy it," Fiona said. "I think it could be wonderful." Zachary turned to her, his expression serious. "Would you ever consider being part of that? Part of making it wonderful?" Fiona's breath caught. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "Not yet," Zachary said. "You are not ready yet, and I respect that. But someday when you are ready, I would like to ask you to marry me, Fiona. I would like to build a life with you here on this land. I wanted you to know that is what I am working toward." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "I want that too. Not yet, but someday. I need more time to make peace with everything, but I do want a future with you, Zachary." He pulled her into his arms, and they stood there holding each other while the wind whispered through the valley. It felt like a promise, like the beginning of something good and lasting. Zachary purchased the property in February and began the work of making it livable while still taking jobs to pay for supplies and improvements. Fiona continued teaching, and they spent every spare moment together. The town had noticed their courtship, of course, and opinions were mixed. Some thought it was too soon after her husband's death. Others were happy to see the young widow finding love again. Fiona tried not to let the gossip bother her. She knew her own heart, knew that Thomas would not want her to spend her life alone. She still had moments of intense grief, days when the loss hit her all over again. But Zachary was patient with her moods and never made her feel guilty for her sadness. In March, Fiona had a vivid dream about Thomas. He appeared to her as he had been in life, healthy and smiling, and told her he was at peace. He told her he wanted her to be happy, to embrace the love she had found with Zachary, to live fully without guilt. When she woke, tears streaming down her face, she felt like she had been given permission to move forward. She told Zachary about the dream the next time she saw him. "I know it was just a dream," she said, "but it felt real. It felt like he was telling me it is okay to let go." "Maybe he was," Zachary said, "or maybe your own heart was telling you what you needed to hear." "I think I am ready," Fiona said. "Not to forget, never to forget, but to truly move forward." "What does that mean?" Zachary asked carefully. Fiona took a deep breath. "It means I am ready for you to ask me that question, the one you said you wanted to ask someday." Zachary's eyes widened, then a smile spread across his face. He got down on one knee right there in the schoolroom where they were standing, taking her hand in his. "Fiona Garrett, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you help me build a home on that ranch, build a life together, face whatever comes our way side by side?" "Yes," Fiona said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Zachary stood and kissed her, and Fiona felt the final pieces of her broken heart begin to knit themselves back together. She would always carry the scar of losing Thomas, but she could also carry the joy of finding Zachary. She was big enough to hold both. They were married in April in the small church in Skidoo, with Mrs. Chen, Mayor Hendricks, and various friends from town in attendance. Fiona wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Zachary wore his best suit. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Fiona felt a sense of rightness settle over her. They spent their wedding night in the ranch house, which Zachary had been working to make comfortable. It was not fancy, but it was clean and sturdy and theirs. As they lay in bed that night, Zachary held Fiona close. "Thank you for taking a chance on me," he said, "for letting me into your heart even when it was broken." "Thank you for seeing past the brokenness," Fiona replied, "for being patient, for loving me anyway." "Not anyway," Zachary corrected gently. "Just loving you, all of you, including the broken parts." Fiona closed her eyes and let herself feel safe in his arms. She had not thought she could ever feel this way again, secure and loved and hopeful about the future. But here she was, married to a good man who had taken the time to truly know her, who had accepted her grief and her guilt and her fears without trying to rush her past them. The school board had been understanding about her marriage, allowing her to continue teaching as long as she wanted. Fiona discovered she enjoyed the balance of teaching during the week and working on the ranch with Zachary on weekends. They fell into an easy partnership, each respecting the other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. Life on the ranch was hard work but satisfying. Zachary gradually built up a small herd of cattle, and they planted a vegetable garden that thrived despite the harsh climate. Fiona learned to ride better, to help with the animals, to manage the household. She discovered she was stronger than she had thought, capable of more than she had imagined. In July, Fiona realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought mixed emotions. She was happy, excited about starting a family with Zachary, but also sad that Thomas would never meet this child, never have the family they had planned together. Zachary understood her tears when she told him the news and held her while she processed the complicated feelings. "This baby will know about Thomas," Zachary promised. "We will make sure of that. Your past is part of you, and I would never ask you to hide it." "You are a remarkable man, Zachary Holbrook," Fiona said through her tears. "I just love you," he replied simply. Fiona taught through the fall, finally resigning her position in November when the pregnancy made it too difficult to keep up with the demands of the classroom. The town found a new teacher, a middle-aged woman from Sacramento who seemed competent and kind, and Fiona felt comfortable leaving the children in her care. She spent the winter preparing for the baby, sewing small clothes, setting up a nursery in one of the spare rooms of the ranch house. Mrs. Chen came to visit regularly, bringing advice and supplies, and Fiona was grateful for the older woman's friendship. She had become something of a mother figure to Fiona, filling a void left by her own mother's death years earlier. The baby arrived in early March of 1884, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival to the entire valley. Zachary was beside himself with joy, holding his son with a wonder and tenderness that made Fiona fall even more deeply in love with him. They named the baby James, after Zachary's father, with Thomas as his middle name. It felt right to honor both the past and the present, to acknowledge where they had come from while looking toward where they were going. Fiona had worried that motherhood would trigger painful memories of the life she had planned with Thomas, but instead she found it healing. Every smile from baby James, every milestone, every moment of joy was a step further into her new life. She loved her son with a fierceness that surprised her, and watching Zachary with him filled her with gratitude that she had been brave enough to open her heart again. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Zachary's herd grew, and they were able to make improvements to the property. They built a proper barn, added on to the house, installed a windmill for better water access. Neighbors helped with big projects, and Zachary returned the favor, creating a network of support that made the hard work more bearable. Fiona occasionally thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Skidoo, carrying a loaded gun and a broken heart. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. The gun still hung on a peg by the door, but Fiona rarely wore it anymore. She no longer felt the need for that kind of protection, that kind of armor. Zachary had taken the gun, metaphorically speaking, and tried to fix the rest. And somehow, miraculously, it had worked. He had given her time and space to heal, had loved her through the grief and the guilt, had shown her that it was possible to honor the past while embracing the future. In the spring of 1886, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was less fear mixed with the joy. James was nearly 2, an energetic toddler who kept them constantly busy, and the idea of adding another child felt right. Zachary was thrilled, already making plans for how they would manage 2 little ones. Their daughter was born in December, just before Christmas. She had Zachary's blue eyes and Fiona's dark hair, and they named her Rose after the desert flowers that somehow thrived in the harsh climate. Watching Zachary with their children, seeing the family they had built together, Fiona sometimes felt overwhelmed by gratitude. She had lost so much, had been so broken, but she had also found more than she ever expected. Life had given her a second chance at happiness, and she had been brave enough to take it. One evening in the summer of 1887, after the children were asleep, Fiona and Zachary sat on their porch watching the sunset. These quiet moments together had become precious, stolen time between the demands of the ranch and the children. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked suddenly. "Marrying me, choosing this life?" Fiona looked at him in surprise. "Never. Why would you ask that? You gave up teaching, which you loved. You work hard here. I know ranch life is not easy." "Nothing worthwhile is easy," Fiona said, "and I would not trade this life for anything. You and the children, this place we have built together, this is everything I needed, even when I did not know I needed it." "I love you," Zachary said simply. "I love you too." Fiona reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers the way they had that first time in the desert. "Thank you for waiting for me to be ready. Thank you for seeing past the broken parts." "The broken parts were what made you strong," Zachary replied. "I would not change a thing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of pink and orange. Fiona thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the depths of grief to this peaceful moment. She thought about Thomas and hoped, wherever he was, he knew she was happy. She thought about the scared, grieving widow who had ridden into Skidoo 5 years ago and marveled at how much had changed. Life was not perfect. The work was still hard, money was sometimes tight, and there were days when grief would suddenly ambush her, sharp and unexpected. But she had learned to make space for all of it, the joy and the sorrow, the past and the present, the love she had lost and the love she had found. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. A drought in 1888 tested them, but they managed to keep the ranch going through careful management and help from neighbors. James started attending school in town, riding in with neighbors' children each morning. Rose grew into a spirited little girl who loved helping Zachary with the animals. In 1889, Fiona gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Sarah. The ranch house felt wonderfully chaotic with 4 children, and Fiona and Zachary learned to navigate the new normal of a large family. Mrs. Chen visited often, delighting in the children and still providing wisdom and support to Fiona. The town of Skidoo grew and changed too. Some mines played out and were abandoned, but new ones opened. Families came and went, but a core group remained, building something lasting in the harsh desert. Fiona became a respected member of the community, known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. In 1891, when James was 7 and showed an aptitude for reading and learning that reminded Fiona of herself, she began supplementing his education at home. She discovered she missed teaching and began offering lessons to some of the other ranch children in the area. It started as just a few afternoons a week, but grew into a small school of sorts, held at the ranch during the summer months when the regular school was closed. Zachary built her a small schoolroom attached to the house, and Fiona found joy in combining her 2 loves, teaching and her family. The children who came to learn brought energy and life to the ranch, and Fiona felt like she was making a difference again. Time moved forward, as it always does. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Fiona and Zachary grew older together. There were hard times, illnesses, financial struggles, disagreements, and disappointments. But there was also laughter, love, achievement, and contentment. Fiona kept a journal through the years, documenting their life together. Sometimes she would read back through the early entries, the ones written when she first arrived in Skidoo, and marvel at how much had changed. The woman who wrote those entries seemed like someone else entirely, someone young and wounded and terrified. In the summer of 1895, James turned 11 and asked about his middle name. Fiona and Zachary had always been honest with the children about Fiona's past, telling them in age-appropriate ways about the husband she had loved and lost before she met Zachary. But this was the first time one of the children had asked for details. They sat down with James that evening and told him the full story. Fiona spoke about Thomas, about their brief marriage and his tragic death, about the grief that had nearly destroyed her. Zachary talked about how they met, how Fiona had been brave enough to start over, how love could happen more than once. "So you loved two people?" James asked, trying to understand. "I did," Fiona confirmed. "I still do in different ways. Thomas will always be part of my heart, but your father is my present and my future." "Does that make sense?" James thought about it seriously. "I think so. It means hearts are bigger than we think they are." "Exactly," Fiona said, pulling her son into a hug. "Hearts are very big indeed." That conversation seemed to open something in Fiona, a final release of the last vestiges of guilt she had carried. She had worried about how to explain her past to her children, worried they might feel she had been disloyal to their father by loving someone before him. But James had understood with the clarity of childhood that love was not a zero-sum game. Fiona sought out the old revolver that night, the one she had carried into Skidoo all those years ago. It was still hanging by the door, though she had not touched it in years. She took it down and turned it over in her hands, remembering the woman who had worn it every day like armor. "What are you thinking?" Zachary asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I do not need this anymore," Fiona said. "I thought I did for so long. I thought being armed meant being safe, being strong. But real strength is something different, is it not? Real strength is getting up every day and choosing to live, to love, to try again even when you are terrified," Zachary said. "Real strength is what you showed every single day since I met you." Fiona looked up at her husband, at the lines around his eyes that came from smiling, at the gray beginning to thread through his hair, at the face she loved more with each passing year. "Will you put this away somewhere?" "Not throw it away because it is part of my history, but put it somewhere safe where it is not the first thing I see every day." "Of course," Zachary said, taking the gun from her. He locked it in a trunk in their bedroom, and Fiona felt lighter for its absence by the door. The turn of the century brought both celebration and reflection. On New Year's Eve 1899, the whole family gathered in their living room, the children excited about the new century dawning. Fiona, now 40 years old, looked around at the family she had built and felt a sense of completion. James was 15, already taller than Fiona and talking about his dreams of becoming a lawyer. Rose was 13, a skilled rider who loved the ranch and the animals as much as her father did. The twins, Daniel and Sarah, were 10 and inseparable, always planning some adventure or scheme together. "What do you wish for in the new century?" Rose asked as midnight approached. "For all of you to be happy and healthy," Zachary said immediately. "For our family to stay strong. For you to chase your dreams, whatever they may be," Fiona added, "and to know that you are loved beyond measure." When midnight came, they cheered and embraced, and Fiona felt tears on her cheeks that were purely joyful. She had survived loss and grief and had come out the other side stronger. She had found love again, had built a family, had created a life worth living. In the spring of 1900, Mayor Hendricks, now quite elderly, asked Fiona to consider returning to teaching at the town school. The current teacher was leaving, and he thought Fiona would be perfect for the position. Her children were old enough that she could manage it, and the town had grown enough that they needed a second teacher anyway. Fiona discussed it with Zachary, and he encouraged her to accept if it was what she wanted. "You have always loved teaching," he said. "And the children are more independent now. We can manage." So Fiona returned to teaching, this time in a new, larger schoolhouse that had been built to accommodate Skidoo's growing population. She loved being back in the classroom, loved working with young minds, loved feeling like she was contributing to the community in a meaningful way. The years from 1900 to 1905 were busy and fulfilling. The children grew and thrived. James went away to school in Sacramento, studying law as he had dreamed. Rose stayed home, helping Zachary run the ranch and showing a natural talent for the business side of things. The twins were in their mid-teens, still figuring out who they wanted to be. Fiona and Zachary's relationship deepened with time. They knew each other so well now, could communicate with a glance, could support each other through challenges with practiced ease. Their love had evolved from the passionate intensity of new romance to something steadier and deeper, a love built on shared history and mutual respect and genuine friendship. In the fall of 1905, Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep. Fiona was devastated by the loss of her friend and mentor, but she also felt grateful for the years they had shared. Mrs. Chen had been there at the very beginning of Fiona's new life in Skidoo, had provided support and wisdom and kindness when Fiona needed it most. At the funeral, Fiona spoke about what Mrs. Chen had meant to her, how the older woman had seen past her grief and recognized her potential. It was a fitting tribute to a woman who had touched many lives in her quiet, competent way. That winter, sitting by the fire while snow fell outside, a rare occurrence in the desert, Fiona found herself reflecting on the entirety of her journey. It had been more than 20 years since she rode into Skidoo with a broken heart and a loaded gun. She had been so lost then, so convinced that she would never be whole again. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked from his chair across from her. "About how far we have come," Fiona said. "About how that scared widow who arrived here all those years ago could never have imagined this life." "You were never just a scared widow," Zachary said. "You were strong and brave and determined to survive. I saw that from the beginning." "You saw the person I could become," Fiona corrected, "and you helped me become her." "We helped each other," Zachary said. "You made me better too, you know. Made me want to build something lasting, made me understand what real love looks like." Fiona got up and moved to sit beside him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire and the snow, content in each other's presence. In 1907, James graduated from law school and returned to California, though he settled in Sacramento rather than Skidoo. Fiona was sad to have him so far away, but proud of what he had accomplished. Rose had met a young rancher from a neighboring property, and a wedding was planned for the following spring. The twins were 17 and talking about their own futures, Daniel interested in medicine, and Sarah wanting to become a teacher like her mother. Life continued its steady progression. Rose married her rancher in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch in May of 1908, and within a year presented Fiona and Zachary with their first grandchild, a boy they named Zachary after his grandfather. Holding that baby, Fiona felt the circle of life completing itself, felt the continuity of family and love spanning generations. James married in 1909, and Sarah began attending normal school to get her teaching certificate. Daniel went to San Francisco to study medicine. The ranch house felt quieter with the children grown and gone, but Fiona and Zachary adapted to being just the two of them again. "It is strange, is it not?" Fiona said one evening. "We spent so many years with the house full of noise and activity, and now it is just us." "I like it," Zachary admitted. "I love our children, love seeing them chase their dreams, but I also like having you to myself again." Fiona laughed and kissed him. "You are a romantic, Zachary Holbrook." "Only with you," he replied. In 1910, Fiona turned 51 and decided it was time to retire from teaching. She had spent more than 2 decades in the classroom, had taught hundreds of children, and she was ready to slow down. She wanted to spend more time at the ranch, more time with Zachary, more time simply enjoying the life they had built. Her retirement was celebrated with a party at the schoolhouse, attended by former students, their parents, and community members. Person after person spoke about the impact Fiona had made, how she had inspired them, or helped them, or changed their lives in small but significant ways. Fiona was moved to tears by their words, humbled by the realization that her life had mattered to so many people. That night, lying in bed beside Zachary, Fiona thought about the speech she had given at the party. She had talked about Skidoo, about how the town had given her a second chance when she desperately needed one. She had talked about the importance of community, of supporting each other, of never giving up even when life seemed impossibly hard. "I am proud of you," Zachary said into the darkness, "of everything you have accomplished, everything you have overcome. You are remarkable, Fiona Holbrook." "We are remarkable," Fiona corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." The next several years were peaceful and contented. Fiona and Zachary worked the ranch, now with help from hired hands since Zachary was getting older and the work was harder. They spent time with their growing family. Rose had 3 children now, James had 2, and Sarah had married a fellow teacher and had a baby girl. Daniel was still in San Francisco but visited when he could. They traveled some, taking trips to see the children, visiting San Francisco and Los Angeles, experiencing parts of California they had never seen. But they always returned to the ranch, to Skidoo, to the place that had become home. In 1915, the town celebrated its anniversary, having been officially established in 1906, though mining operations had started earlier. There were speeches and festivities, and Fiona and Zachary were recognized as pillars of the community, having been there through all the changes and challenges. "Do you remember when I first rode into town?" Fiona asked Zachary during the celebration. "What did you think when you saw me?" "I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen," Zachary admitted. "And the saddest. I wanted to know your story, wanted to help if I could. I never imagined I would fall in love with you, would spend my life with you, but I am grateful every day that I did." "I am grateful too," Fiona said. "You saved me, Zachary. You took my broken heart and helped me put it back together." "You saved yourself," Zachary countered. "I just loved you while you did it." As they moved into their 60s, Fiona and Zachary began to slow down more noticeably. The ranch work became harder, and they talked about selling off some of the land, keeping just enough for a small operation. But the land represented so much of their shared history that neither could quite bring themselves to do it. Rose's eldest son, now a young man, expressed interest in taking over the ranch eventually. He loved the work and the land the way Zachary did, and it gave Fiona and Zachary peace of mind to know the place they had built would stay in the family. In 1920, Fiona turned 61, and Zachary was 63. They were grandparents many times over now, with children scattered across California. They talked often about how blessed they were, how rich their lives had been. One evening in late summer, They walked up to the spot where Zachary had first told Fiona he wanted to build a future with her. The valley spread out before them, still beautiful, still wild, still home. "You ever think about that day?" Zachary asked. "When you first came to see the property?" "All the time," Fiona admitted. "I was so scared to want anything, so afraid to hope, but you made me believe it was possible." "And was it possible? I mean, more than possible," Fiona said. "It was everything I needed and more than I deserved." "You deserved happiness," Zachary said firmly. "You always did." They stood together as the sun set, just as they had so many times over the years. Fiona thought about the gun she had carried into town all those years ago, about the broken heart that had seemed beyond repair. She thought about how Zachary had taken the gun, metaphorically at least, and tried to fix the rest. And he had. Through patience and kindness and unwavering love, he had helped her heal. He had given her space to grieve while showing her it was possible to love again. He had built a life with her that honored both her past and their present. He had been her partner, her friend, her love for more than 3 decades. "Thank you," Fiona said softly. "For what?" "For everything. For seeing me when I did not want to be seen. For staying when I tried to push you away. For loving me through the broken parts until I was whole again." "You were always whole," Zachary said. "Just wounded. There is a difference." Fiona leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her. They stayed there until the stars came out, until the desert cooled, until it was time to go back to the house they had made a home. The years continued to pass. The ranch stayed in the family when Rose's son took it over in 1925, allowing Fiona and Zachary to move into a smaller house in town. They remained active in the community, beloved by multiple generations who remembered Fiona's teaching or Zachary's helpful nature. Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling their home with noise and laughter and life. Fiona kept her journal, still documenting the days, wanting to preserve the memories for future generations. She wrote about the people they loved, the challenges they had overcome, the joy they had found in simple things. In the spring of 1928, Fiona fell ill with pneumonia. Zachary nursed her through it with devoted care, sitting by her bedside, reading to her, holding her hand. She recovered but was weaker than before, and they both knew their time together was growing shorter. "I am not afraid," Fiona told Zachary one day. "I have lived a good life, a full life. If my time comes, I am at peace with it." "I am not ready to lose you," Zachary said, his voice breaking. "You will never lose me," Fiona assured him. "I will always be with you, just like Thomas is still with me. Love does not end, Zachary. It just changes form." They talked about their life together, about memories and moments, about regrets and triumphs. Fiona made Zachary promise to keep living after she was gone, to not let grief consume him the way it had almost consumed her. "Find joy," she told him. "Spend time with the children and grandchildren. Keep the memory of what we had alive, but do not stop living your own life." Zachary promised, though she could see it hurt him to think about a future without her. As it turned out, Fiona recovered her strength that summer and they had several more good years together. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923, surrounded by family and friends, marveling at how much time had passed and how blessed they had been. But in the winter of 1931, Zachary had a stroke. It was severe, and though he survived the initial crisis, he never fully recovered. Fiona became his caregiver, repaying the devotion he had shown her so many times over the years. She sat with him, read to him, told him stories of their life together, made sure he knew every day how much he was loved. Their children came to help, taking turns staying with them, making sure neither of them was alone. It was a difficult time but also a gift, those final months together. They talked about everything and nothing. They held hands and watched the sunsets. They told each other, over and over, how grateful they were for the life they had shared. Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep in March of 1932, with Fiona holding his hand. She was devastated by the loss, but also grateful that he had not suffered long, that he had been surrounded by love at the end. The funeral was large, attended by people from all over the region. Zachary had touched many lives with his kindness and his willingness to help. Person after person spoke about what he had meant to them, and Fiona felt proud of the man she had loved. In the months after Zachary's death, Fiona experienced grief again, but this time it was different. She had learned from her loss of Thomas that grief was not something to run from but something to move through. She let herself feel the pain, let herself miss Zachary, but she did not let it destroy her. She spent time with her children and grandchildren. She wrote in her journal, documenting the story of her life and her loves, wanting future generations to know where they came from. She took walks in the desert, finding peace in the landscape that had been her home for 50 years. One day, nearly a year after Zachary's death, Fiona went to the trunk where he had stored her old revolver all those years ago. She took it out and held it, remembering the woman who had worn it every day, who had thought being armed meant being strong. She understood now that real strength had nothing to do with weapons or armor. Real strength was love. Real strength was getting up every morning and choosing to live fully even when life was hard. Real strength was opening your heart even when it had been broken before. Fiona cleaned the revolver carefully, then wrapped it and put it back in the trunk. It was part of her history, part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She was so much more than the scared widow who had ridden into Skidoo with a loaded gun and a broken heart. She was a woman who had loved deeply twice. She was a mother and grandmother. She was a teacher who had shaped young minds. She was a member of a community she had helped build. She was a survivor who had become a thriver. In 1935, Fiona turned 76. Her health was failing, and she knew her time was growing short. She gathered her children around her and told them she was ready, that she had lived a long and beautiful life and was at peace. "Tell your children about Thomas," she said to them, "and about your father. Tell them about the power of love to heal, about the importance of second chances, about never giving up even when things seem impossible." Her children promised, tears in their eyes. Fiona spent her final weeks visiting with family, looking through old photographs, reading through her journals. She thought about her long, unexpected journey from grief to joy, from brokenness to wholeness. She thought about the two men she had loved, and how both had shaped her into the woman she became. On a warm evening in late May, Fiona passed away peacefully surrounded by her children. Her last thoughts were of gratitude for the rich, full life she had been given, for the love she had known, for the family she had built, for the community she had belonged to. They buried her next to Zachary in the Skidoo cemetery, on a hill overlooking the valley where they had built their ranch. The gravestone read, "Fiona Garrett Holbrook, 1859–1935, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher, friend. She carried love in her heart and gave it freely." At the funeral, her eldest grandson, James's son, spoke about the legacy Fiona and Zachary had left. He talked about how they had shown their family what real love looked like, what commitment meant, what it took to build a life worth living. He talked about how Fiona had arrived in Skidoo broken but had refused to stay that way, had done the hard work of healing, had been brave enough to love again. "My grandmother taught us that hearts are bigger than we think they are," he said. "That they can hold both grief and joy, both past and present, both loss and new love. She showed us that being strong does not mean never breaking, it means putting yourself back together and trying again. That is the gift she gave us, and that is what we will pass on to our children. The family gathered at the ranch after the funeral, sharing stories and memories. They talked about Fiona's terrible cooking in the early days before she learned her way around a ranch kitchen. They talked about how she would read to the children every night, no matter how tired she was. They talked about her laugh, her stubbornness, her capacity for love. Rose spoke about how her mother had shown her it was possible to honor the past while embracing the future. James talked about how she had encouraged his education even when it meant he would leave Skidoo. The twins remembered how she had always treated them as individuals, never lumping them together. As the sun set over the valley, the family stood together and raised glasses in toast to Fiona and Zachary, to the love they had shared, to the family they had built, to the legacy they had left. It was a fitting tribute to two people who had shown everyone around them what was possible when you chose love over fear, hope over despair, life over mere survival. Years later, one of Fiona's great-granddaughters found her journals in an attic trunk. She read through them, captivated by her great-grandmother's words, by the story of a woman who had lost everything and found a way to build something beautiful from the wreckage. She transcribed the journals carefully, wanting to preserve them for future generations. The story of Fiona and Zachary became part of the family lore, passed down through generations. It was a story about the power of love to heal, about second chances, about the strength it takes to be vulnerable again after being hurt. It was a story about two people who found each other at exactly the right time and built a life that mattered. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, a testament to what Zachary and Fiona had built together. And sometimes, on warm evenings when the sun set over the valley, family members would swear they could feel the presence of those two, still together, still in love, still watching over the land and the people they had loved so much. It was exactly the kind of ending Fiona would have wanted. Not a conclusion, but a continuation. Love did not end, it just changed form, spreading outward through family and time, touching new lives, inspiring new stories. She had carried a loaded gun and a broken heart into Skidoo, and Zachary had taken the gun and fixed the rest. But more than that, they had fixed each other, had built something together that would outlast them both. In the end, that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave. Not wealth or fame, but love. Pure, enduring, transformative love that reached across decades and generations, proving again and again that no heart was ever truly broken beyond repair. It just needed time, patience, and the right person willing to help carry the pieces until they could be made whole again.